It seemed that I would be the one that would play him, because nobody else was doing my songs and the chances of my actually getting a musical. Music, for decades, the dynamic between David Bowie and Mick Jagger has lived somewhere between myth and reality. Their chemistry was undeniable, but no one could quite define it. Music. Then came a claim from Angie Bowie that pushed the story into a different light entirely. She didn't speak in rumors or theories. She described a moment she says she witnessed herself. And if her account is true, it may explain why their relationship always felt like something more. The darkness before stardom. Before the world ever met Ziggy Music, Stardust, there was just David Robert Jones, a regular kid growing up in London, living what looked like a pretty normal life. His father, Music, worked for a children's charity. His mother, Peggy, waited tables, and from the outside, nothing really stood out. It felt like Music, the kind of quiet, everyday upbringing you wouldn't expect to produce a global icon. But beneath that surface, there was something heavier sitting in the music background. Peggy came from a family marked by serious mental health struggles. That wasn't just a passing issue. It ran deep. Biographer Mark Spitz Music once described schizophrenia in the family like a curse, something that lingered in the bloodline. And the reality with conditions like that is they don't always show themselves right away. Sometimes they stay buried until life hits hard enough to bring them out. For Peggy and her siblings, life hit hard more than once. First, there was their mother, Margaret, a woman many describe as unstable and harsh, someone who created a tense, loveless environment at home. Then came the Blitz during Music, World War II, when London lived under constant threat of bombings. Imagine growing up with that kind of fear hanging over you every night. That kind of pressure didn't just shake the city, it shook people mentally. By the time David came into the picture, that history hadn't disappeared. It lingered in the atmosphere around him. Inside the household, warmth wasn't exactly overflowing. Margaret wasn't known for being affectionate. In fact, even her own daughter described her as cold, the kind of person who kept love at a distance. And it didn't stop there. Two of Peggy's sisters, Music, Nora and Vivian, began showing signs of schizophrenia early on, with their conditions getting worse during the war years. So, while David's childhood might have looked ordinary from the outside, there was always this quiet tension underneath, and as he grew older, that reality started to weigh on him. He couldn't ignore what he was seeing in his family. At some point, the thought crossed his mind. What if that same fate was waiting for him? That fear may have shaped more than people realized. Some believe his constant music reinvention, the way he moved between identities, wasn't just creativity. It was music control, a way of breaking himself into pieces on his own terms before anything else could do it for him. Still, if you looked at young David early on, nothing immediately screamed superstardom. Music, he was just another kid in 1950s England. But it didn't take long for people to notice. There was something different about him. By the time he was 6, teachers were already pointing him out. He was bright, clearly gifted, but not quiet about it. He had a streak in him, a little rebellious, a little confrontational. The kind of kid who didn't just blend into the background. As he got older, that energy only grew stronger. Around 9 years old, his teachers were already amazed by his dancing. They described him as vividly artistic, someone with a natural poise that didn't match his age. It was like he had something inside him that needed an outlet. It just hadn't fully found its direction yet. That spark didn't come from nowhere. A major turning point came when his father brought home a stack of American records. That moment shifted everything. These weren't just songs. They were a whole new world. Artists like Elvis Presley and Little Richard weren't just making music. They were creating energy, attitude, presence. And for David, Little Richard hit different. Hearing Tutti Frutti wasn't just exciting. Music, it was overwhelming. He later described it like hearing something divine, like music had suddenly opened a door he didn't even know existed. From that point on, there was no turning back. Music wasn't a hobby anymore. It became part of who he was. By the end of the 1950s, he was already experimenting with instruments, picking up whatever he could, ukulele, piano, even a homemade tea-chest bass. He threw himself into performing, channeling the energy of the artists he admired. Even as a kid, when he performed for his local group, people noticed. There was something about him that didn't feel ordinary. Music, something hard to explain, but impossible to ignore. And while music was shaping him, another major influence was right there in his life. His half-brother, Terry Burns. Terry's story carried a lot of pain. Born under difficult circumstances, and raised by a grandmother who was both emotionally and physically abusive. He grew up dealing with trauma that never really left him. Over time, music, that trauma developed into serious mental health struggles, including schizophrenia. Music, but to David, Terry wasn't defined by that. He was a cool older brother, the one who introduced him to new ideas, new sounds, new ways of thinking. Terry opened the door to things like jazz, beat poetry, and the kind of art that pushed boundaries. Even though he came in and out of David's life, his influence stuck in a big way. David admired him deeply, but he also saw the reality of his condition up close, and that added another layer to quiet fear already music, building in the back of his mind. Then came a moment that would physically music mark him forever. As a teenager, David was close with his friend George Underwood. They did everything together until things music got complicated over a girl. It started like typical teenage drama, but it didn't stay small. After a misunderstanding, one that David played a role in, George lashed out. The punch wasn't just a quick scuffle. His fingernail caught David's left eye, causing serious damage. At first, it didn't seem like something that would last, but it did. Doctors managed to save the eye, which was a huge relief. But the injury left permanent damage to muscles, caused his left pupil to stay fully dilated. The condition known as anuria gave his eyes that striking, uneven look the world would later become music fascinated by. At the time, though, it wasn't about image or mystique. It was just another moment in a life that was still far from the spotlight. By his mid-teens, it was already clear that David's ambition was moving at a completely different speed from everyone around him. At just 15, he started his first band, the Conrads. Music, for most kids, that would have been enough, but for him, it wasn't even close. He could already see something bigger, something none of the others seemed to understand. And that gap in vision, it frustrated him. So he didn't wait around. He moved on. Next stop was the King Bees. And this time, he wasn't playing small. He was locked in, determined to make something happen, even if it meant dragging the whole situation forward himself. And in a move that said everything about his mindset, he decided to reach out to someone at the top. He wrote directly to entrepreneur John Bloom, basically asking him to do for his band what Brian Epstein had done for the Beatles. It was bold, maybe even a little unrealistic, but it showed exactly how he saw himself. Bloom didn't take the offer, but he didn't shut the door completely either. He connected David to Leslie Kahn, who stepped in to help promote his first music single. Still, even with that push, the King Bees weren't giving him what he needed. So once again, he made the call to leave. That became a pattern. He moved on to the Manish Boys, this time with a clear vision in his head. He wanted to be their version of MC Jagger. Frontman energy, swagger, presence. But no matter how much he pushed, the band just didn't have the spark to match what he was trying to build. So he kept it moving. The next music stop was a lower third. On paper, it looked like it might finally click. But in reality, it was just another step in the same cycle. Close, but not quite right. While all this was going on, while he was bouncing from band to band, chasing something he couldn't fully grab yet, his personal life found a bit more stability. In 1964, he met Dana Gillespie, a young actress and songwriter. He was 17. She was 14. And despite how chaotic his life already was, they built a connection that lasted for years. They weren't just a couple. They were creative partners moving through that period together. But even with that steady presence, his career hit a different kind of obstacle. He had a name problem. Up to that point, he'd been performing as Davy Jones. The issue was there was already a well-known Davy Jones out there fronting the Monkees. And in an industry where identity is everything, that kind of overlap could bury you before you even get started. So he made another calculated move. He let the old name go and went searching for something sharper, something that would stand on its own. That's how David Robert Jones became David Bowie. The name came from James Bowie, a 19th century American frontiersman, known for the Bowie knife, a heavy, unmistakable blade built to cut through anything in its path. That idea stuck with him. He wanted a name that felt just as direct, just as cutting, something music that could slice through noise, confusion, expectations, and once it clicked, it stuck. By 1966, he officially stepped into that identity. Not long after, he released a single under the new name while still working with the Lower Third. But when it failed to make an impact, he didn't hesitate. He walked away again. For the next stretch of time, he kept moving, playing with different groups, trying different sounds. Nothing really landed. So, by 1967, he made another shift, this time stepping away from bands completely to go solo. He released his first album, a self-titled project that didn't hold back. It jumped between styles: pop, experimental sounds, music, psychedelia. It was all over the place in the best way. But the problem was the world hadn't caught up yet. People didn't know what to do with it. The album failed, and after so many attempts that didn't connect, it forced him into a real moment of reflection. For the first time, he started questioning whether the issue wasn't the music, but himself. That's when things took a deeper turn. Around that same time, he started searching for something beyond music, something that could give his music life direction. His half-brother Terry had introduced him to Buddhism, and it hit a nerve, not lightly either. David didn't approach it as a phase. He went all in, seriously considering leaving everything behind to become a monk. That search led him to Chaim Rinpoche, a Buddhist teacher. When David first met him, he took the moment as a sign, like he had finally found what he was looking for. For a while, he fully leaned into that path, studying and trying to reshape his life around it. But it didn't last. Rinpoche saw something David couldn't see yet. He understood that this wasn't the right road for him. The discipline, the stillness, it didn't match who he was at his core. And eventually, he guided him back toward the one thing that always made sense: music. That moment didn't instantly fix everything, but it reset his direction. It pushed him back into his purpose, this time with a clearer understanding of himself. And as he moved forward, that honesty started to show, not just in his music sound, but in how he presented himself to the world. By the early 1970s, he wasn't just experimenting with music anymore. He was challenging identity, gender, and expectations. In 1972, he openly spoke about his sexuality, later clarifying that he was bisexual. At the music time, that wasn't just personal expression. It was risky. Even though laws had started to shift in 1967, homosexuality in Britain was still heavily restricted and stigmatized. Music, public expression, could still carry serious consequences. Music. So when he stepped out the way he did, it wasn't just about style. It was a statement. He wasn't trying to lead a movement. He wasn't trying to represent anyone. He was just being himself. But in doing that, he ended up pushing boundaries for everyone watching. Still, back in 1967, none of that had music fully come to the surface yet. His identity, his struggles, his questions, they were all still forming behind the scenes. At that point, it was still private, still something shared only within his close circle. When art turned into obsession by 1967, music, David Bowie stepped into a moment that would quietly reshape everything about him. That's when he met Lynn Seacamp, a dancer and performer whose influence would reach far beyond the stage. Bowie music. Sign up for classes at the London Dance Centre. But this wasn't just about learning how to move. It was about learning how to communicate without saying a word. Kemp introduced him to something deeper. Movement wasn't just motion. It was emotion, control, presence. Every gesture had meaning. Every pause had power. It gave Bowie a whole new way to connect with people, one that would later define the larger-than-life characters he became known for. But the connection between them didn't stay strictly professional. There was a natural pull between the two from the start. Kemp had already been drawn to Bow's music. While Bowie was fascinated by Kemp's theatrical way of living, to him, Kemp wasn't just an artist on stage. His entire life felt like a performance. That kind of energy left a mark. For a while, their relationship became this intense mix of art, emotion, and attraction. But when two strong personalities collide like that, it rarely stays balanced for long. The age gap between them was there, but that wasn't the real issue. Bowie's restlessness caught up with him again. His inability to stay committed eventually broke. Music, things apart, especially after Kemp discovered he had been involved with someone else. Even with that fallout, they didn't completely separate. They kept working together, and in a way, that mattered more in the long run. Kemp's influence stayed embedded in Bowie's approach to performance. That idea of image, of using the body as part of the storytelling, it stuck, and through music, Bowie's life shifted again. In 1968, he landed a role in a BBC production called The Pistol Shot. Kemp was involved in choreographing part of it, and that's where Bowie met Hermione Farthingale. She was a dancer, and from the moment they connected, it was clear something was there. The relationship moved quickly. They became close, started building a life together, and for a moment, it looked like Bowie had found music, something stable. But history repeated itself. By early 1969, Hermione left for Norway to work on a film, and the relationship came to an end. Bowie didn't try to dress it up or shift the blame. He knew exactly music would have gone wrong. His pattern of infidelity had caught up with him again. Still, the impact of that relationship didn't disappear. Hermione stayed in his mind, influencing his music and shaping the emotional space he was working in at the time. And right after that chapter closed, another one opened fast. In 1969, music,